Hi, welcome. My name is Ann Hazels. I'm the director of Radius Gallery, and I'm joined here tonight with two scientists and an artist. And we're going to be talking about the connection of art and science and how it affects our environment. So join with me here tonight is Laurie Egan, who's with the Coastal Watershed Council, Yolande Harris, who's the artist with the exhibit inside called From a Whale's Back, and then Ari Friedlaender, who's with UCSC, which is where the data was collected to create the exhibition. So I'd love to hear a little bit of an introduction from each of you, if you don't mind, just introducing yourselves. Laurie, we'll start with you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Laurie Egan. I'm the programs director at the Coastal Watershed Council. And at the Coastal Watershed Council, we are entirely focused on transforming the lower San Lorenzo River into a community destination. So we work on water quality, we work on habitat enhancement, we work on bringing people to the river through events and youth education in the classroom and on field trips to the river. And one of my favorite projects that I've had the opportunity to work on in this time is Ebb Flow and the Ebb Flow River Arts Festival, where I got to meet Anne. God, 5-6 years ago, I don't know how long it's been, but we've been having amazing river arts experiences all that time, many of which are curated by you. And hopefully folks watching have been to the Tannery campus where we're sitting now, where we've had, dancers dancing off the side of the building and marches along the river. And what made that so special for me and my work was seeing people's faces light up when they saw the San Lorenzo River for the first time. This river flows through our community, and there's so many folks who have never been down here to experience it. So that magic of seeing somebody smile, seeing kids excited about skipping stones, that's what makes me love my job. That's why I love the work I do.
And Yolande.
Hi, thank you. My name's Yolande Harris. This is my daughter Jasmine in the background telling me what to do. Come here, Jasmine. Come on. This is Jasmine. All right. There we are. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Anne, for hosting us today, and Laurie for coming, and of course Ari, who I could not have made this work with at all. So I have the show here on From a Whale's Back, and I've been working on underwater sound in art context for the last 10 or 15 years. And this is a real privilege to have this space and the time to really piece together this work within the community in Santa Cruz, which is it's obviously a much more global topic that we're working with, but to start it off in Santa Cruz is a nice thing.
Yeah, great. And Ari, welcome.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. My name is Ari Friedlander. I'm an associate researcher at UC Santa Cruz and the director for research at the California Ocean Alliance. And most of my research and teaching focuses on marine mammals and understanding how marine mammals behave and coming up with new technologies to put on these animals to study them underwater. It involves a lot of tagging, a lot of going to remote places as well as local places. One of the reasons I'm here is because Monterey Bay is such a fantastic place for wildlife, with places like the San Lorenzo River and the bay. We've got a lot of animals around. I grew up in Connecticut, and my parents one was a scientist and the other curates an art museum. And so from a very early age, I was exposed to both of those things as being interesting and valuable. And my parents actually collaborate on projects together. And I've tried in my research to try and come up with either educational tools or ways to collaborate with artists to share the things that we do to a broader audience, so that we can make a bit more of a difference, I think, in how people understand animals, understand the environment, and then hopefully empathize with the things that we're doing to it.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for being here. So to give a little bit of context, why we're all joined together, I strongly believe that the more we can collaborate together and put art and science, the better we make our world for our generation, and then also future generations. But this concept that Yolande had for exhibition was this idea of interconnectedness. And it teamed me up with the Ebb Flow project because our gallery doors here, just on the other side of the tannery is the San Lorenzo River, and the San Lorenzo River flows into the Monterey Bay, which flows into the Pacific Ocean, which then takes us to the whales that you've been researching for years and years. But there's so much history in this land alone that we have from the native California peoples, and then it was also Saul's Tannery. It was in operation for 146 years. So there's a huge history on this property. You know, as we're speaking this evening, we'll probably see, you know, kids wandering back and forth or people traveling through here. But there's a really incredible story that this land tells to us every time that we do projects here. The river is one part of this, and it's the environment that we create here. I want to get a little bit deeper into how the two of you paired together and how you connected. And I know it was one, the whale, and two, the ocean, because it's, you know, you're both so passionate about it, you know, for environmental reasons, actually, and you both use it on your platforms. So can you talk a little bit about how the exhibition came to be?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been involved with the ocean for my whole life. I've grown up around it in the UK and the Atlantic Ocean, and the idea of dealing with the underwater environment that we cannot access was very important to me. So one of the ways that I looked at that was through underwater sound, knowing that sound is a crucial way of navigating through those spaces and understanding them. And so the projects that I've been doing have been working with other scientists who enabled me to use some of their sounds that they'd gathered from different hydrophones around the world. And at some point, I was wanting to explore what it might be like if we could follow the sound of one animal, so a moving sound source, and see what that was like. So I got it in my head, really on a hunch, that I wanted to find somebody who worked with these tags. And I didn't know that much about it, but I sort of pieced it together and found that Ari happened to be at UCSC right under my nose, which I didn't realize. And the even better thing was, once I introduced myself to you, you said yes. I mean, that sounds like a simple thing, but this is a big deal, you know, to have some stranger who's an artist who works in another field come up to a very busy scientist and say, "Hi, I'm interested in, you know, messing around with your tag data or whatever." I mean, I'm serious, and hopefully I didn't come across like I was going to waste your time, but it was, you know, it's always the interesting kind of point where, you know, how will that work? Mm-hmm. Will somebody be even interested in going further? And you were. So, you know, I remember the first time I came to see you in your lab, and you showed me these incredible videos and the sound that went with them, and you were like, "There's more, and here's more, and here's more, and there's this one." And I was like, "Oh, okay, please, can I have some?" And you filtered through a lot of it and gave me hours still. I think over the period I've given me a lot of data, and it's been such a valuable experience. So that's really how it started. I mean, maybe you can say something.
I can recall when Yolande reached out to me, and you know, when we write our research proposals, typically what we're trying to do is to understand something that's happening in a natural system. But a lot of the proposals also include outreach and broader impacts. Mm-hmm. And coming from sort of that background of art and culture, exhibits, galleries, mixed media sorts of things, I think I'm sort of predisposed to thinking about ways that we can use the data outside of science. And I'm busy in the fact that I have a lot of work, mm-hmm. but I'm not an artist. You know, I take photographs and I can understand things, but I'm not the artist. But being able to provide opportunities for people to utilize the things that we're doing is important to me, but it also helps to, I think, validate all the resources that go into these projects. You know, when mm-hmm. we go to the Antarctic, it takes months of time, months of people's time, the logistics support and everything that goes into it. I want to maximize everybody's effort that went into it. Mm-hmm. And so to just have the science come out of it, I feel would be selling it short. And so having an outlet that is more creative, that reaches a broader audience, mm-hmm. to me is great value. Yeah. I also just think from my own perspective of what is what do people respond to, and how do we get more people to be, like I said, empathetic or caring about the animals, the places on the planet that sometimes are very distant from them, but sometimes
Sure.
are very close and they don't even know about them being local.
Right.
And so anything we can do to inform people and share with them things that they didn't see or know about before, I think can be very powerful. And whales are an awesome tool. I mean, they people identify with the animals at a very fundamental level.
Yeah.
We have millions of people that come to Monterey Bay just to go whale watching, to come and see the things that we have locally. And so to me, there's a great vehicle there to be able to say, use this and go forth.
Great. So, Laurie, we worked together with Ebb Flow. I think it was 1 year ago. There was a project. You talking about collecting data. It reminds me of River Motion, and it was a piece that was installed down on the Soquel Street Bridge, and it was determining. It was actually really a conversation about water health, which I think is a lot about what your work, both of you, are talking about when it comes to the wellness of a being, whether it's a human or a whale. It really comes back to the water health. Can you talk a little bit about that project that you worked on and how the data was provided with the River Motion?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking of the same project myself, and for folks in Santa Cruz that might remember driving over the Soquel Avenue Bridge at night, you saw these waves of color, and they were vibrant and they were dynamic and shifting and changing. And all of that color represented different components of water quality data. So how dynamic that visual piece was really represented how dynamic the river is. And I thought that was just a beautiful connection, that there's no way you can see that you can see that in a spreadsheet, but not really. Like, seeing that in artistic form is just, it brings meaning to the data that you can't see otherwise, and,
Sure.
and the emotional component that it can bring to, like, that's one of my favorite things, is to be able to go down to the river. I'm sure it's the same, with the ocean or all the places that people love, where you go down and you feel how dynamic that is. And I can spend all day in a spreadsheet and I can see some of that dynamism, but being able to see it on a bridge and really highlighted to the whole community was really special. So one of the things that we try to do with our data, we collect water quality data. We use volunteers to do that. Actually, we train people on how to take different samples. We run those samples through labs, gather different water quality data points, and then we try to share that with the community in order to inspire action. We know that long gone are the days where it's just a single factory that's dumping pollution into the San Lorenzo River, but rather it's a little bit of pollution from my backyard or your backyard or school or place of work that really builds up, and when it rains, that all washes into the river itself. And so a lot of the dynamism we saw in that art piece and we see in the data, we know comes from our whole watershed. And so one of the beautiful things and the next step where we can take it is inspiring people to take action as a result of that. So people can know, oh, hey, maybe I shouldn't, see soap from my car washing down the storm drain or all those little things. So it's really cool when all of these different pieces connect through an art project that really brings in the science and just the beauty of it all into one. So I too loved working on that project.
So when you all are collecting data, is it something that's done like weekly or monthly, or how is it accomplished?
Yeah, the city and the county of Santa Cruz, they collect the most data, and it is, I believe, on a weekly basis for the San Lorenzo River. And if you Google the County of Santa Cruz GIS website, you can actually go, and they have this cool little map with a red, yellow, green system. So it's very easy to digest, and you can find for local beaches and for creeks and streams when the date was it was last tested. And then the red, yellow, green system helps you see, like, is it red? You probably don't want to go touch that water. Green, go for it. Pretty simple to digest. And Coastal Watershed Council, we now do an annual, actually was supposed to be our 21st annual Snapshot Day water quality event this May. We had to cancel it for the very first time, but that has become a beloved community science monitoring event where we send teams all over the county to test water quality data and get to explore places they've never been before.
And the hope is recreation, right? I mean, at one time, the San Lorenzo was, a fishing mecca, right? It was, swimming with so many salmon and steelhead. And
Absolutely. Yeah, it was known as the best fishing location south of the Russian River. So we still have the Russian River to compete with up in Northern California. But yeah, coho salmon and steelhead trout were just teeming in this river. You talk to folks that the last time I actually was on a panel at the tannery, George Au was on the panel with me, and he was saying just growing up here and remembering going to visit the San Lorenzo River and getting to see the fish in it is just something that was really profound and stuck out in his memory. And I would love to see the day when we have those runs of steelhead trout and see some coho back in this river as well.
The Museum of Art and History has photos of this, and I'm blown away every time I see them. It wasn't that long ago, when we think of it, which is when we're speaking of our environment. I mean, it's this reminder of how quickly it can change and how much we affect it every single day. Let's move back to the exhibit that we have right in front of us. So there's a device that's attached to the whale. And Yolande has explained this a bit to me, but I'd love to hear in detail of how this device is attached. And then there's this fascinating thing. I know there's a GPS system, or GPS that's on this device. I have this fascination about, a dozen scientists like swimming around trying to find this little blob floating out in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah. So
it happens just like that, right?
It's exactly like that. And we only show people videos when it works, too. That's the other thing. Whenever I give a talk, I'm like, look, I'm going to show you it working.
Right.
It's going to look easy when it works.
Yeah.
Half the time I'm swearing at myself or the animal, and it doesn't work.
Honestly, it's like installation artists, right?
Exactly like installation. It's only a little bit less wet and cold.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So what the tags are, they're very similar to your smartphone. They have motion sensors that tell you whether you're rolling or pitching or what your heading is. They measure the depth of the animal. They have a hydrophone, obviously, so they record sound. And the ones that we're working with Yolande also have a video camera, so you can see from the animal's perspective kind of what's going on. The tags are about, what they're about the size of maybe two of your cell phones put together. And they have 4 little suction cups. And we have about a 20-foot long carbon fiber pole. And I stand out on the end of a little Zodiac and basically try and sneak up on the whale and slap the tag on its back. Just pop it on its back. We've got lots of good videos of this online.
Oh, okay.
The tags stay on for about a day. And they also have a couple of transmitters. So they have a GPS, so the tag knows where it is in space. But it also has a VHF or a radio transmitter on it. So when the tag is at the surface, after it falls off the animal, it kind of sits tail first in the water. It floats. And there's an antenna that sticks up, and it's sending out a signal. And we have a little antenna and a little receiver, and we're listening for beeps. And we basically go and listen and move in the direction that the beeps are. And then we just pick it up out of the water. We download the data. It archives all the data on there. And then we have these parties where as soon as we download the data, it's like, everyone, let's check out the video and see what we saw.
Right.
And the reason we put the video on science-wise was because we see the animals doing these things underwater. They go down to depth, and we see all these really interesting undulations. But we don't know what the animals are actually doing. And we also don't know how the environment of the animal is influencing what it does. So in order to see from the animal's perspective why it's doing what it's doing, we put these video cameras on. So, for instance, if we have an animal that is making sounds and is communicating acoustically, is it doing it because there's another animal right next to it? Or is there something about what it's doing that might cause that animal to do it? Are they encountering jellyfish? What's the environment like around the animals? And so for us, that's just a good thing to sort of get into our mind so that we can better understand what the whales are doing and what their perspective is like. And then it provides this really cool opportunity to see and hear at the same time, which I think the more senses you kind of activate at once, I think the more you yourself probably get entranced in what you're seeing. And so when I went in there, I felt like I was right on that animal, and I was looking around. I could hear the sounds that the killer whales were making, and we were talking about how tactile they are with each other. And you can see that connection between animals, and you're saying, wow, okay, they're literally right next to each other, and they're contacting and communicating with each other in a way that seems very social and similar to what we would do if you're out, with your daughter. And so showing those things that you don't even have to explain to people, but you just let them experience it, and it so kind of infuses into them, I think helps to make a really strong connection. And then the messaging that you want to get sort of beyond that, whether it's whales are here because our rivers are healthy and the oceans are healthy, and a whale represents a healthy ocean community, and you can kind of link in those sorts of ideas to people when they're seeing this art. I think it starts to make a bit of a circle. And then I just think about this community here and how Monterey Bay was probably first settled, at least by Europeans, for the resources from the ocean. And that now people value the ability to live on the ocean, to use a river, and all of the things that are part of our lifestyle here that I think people may take for granted. If you've lived somewhere else, you don't. You come in, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But if you grew up here, that was just part of your experience every day. And I think this is a great way to showcase that to people and to get people excited. Yeah.
I love that about Santa Cruz, is that there is this enthusiasm about that, like let's showcase it and let's figure out a way to talk about this year round. It's not only on Earth Day or only on, days that we're honoring whales or, these other types of times where it's just a one special day or one special week, but really in Santa Cruz I feel like it's honored year round, which is pretty amazing. I'm curious about the sound. Does the same device collect the sound and the video?
No, so we have a dedicated hydrophone.
Okay.
And then there's a video camera that also is recording the sound, but for the quality that you would need for either an acoustic analysis or for the presentation, there's its own separate audio channel.
It's amazing how clear it is, and you can get some really refined sound in there. And when Yolande has put other sound on top of it, which makes you feel like you're stepping in, like I feel like I'm in the ocean, right there with them. The first time I saw the work, I felt like I was riding on the whale's back, but it was Mama Whale who was taking me all the way through. It was very, kind of paternal feel or maternal feel that the work had.
And I think that was an unintended benefit of that. Like I said, we put that on so that we could help to contextualize what the data were showing us.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start to see the video, you have that emotion and that feeling as well, and it's undeniable. And that probably, maybe unconsciously, sort of led me down the road of, gosh, we need to come up with ways to get this in the hands of people that can communicate this more broadly and create an environment in a space that gets that emotion across better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yolande, I think a lot about the conversations we had when you were creating the exhibit. Collectively, we're all here with shared reasons of making the world better, getting the water health to everything should be healthier, for our bodies, for the land, for the air. And so it's the activism piece. And you've talked a lot about your work and it being environmental art and using art as activism. If you can speak about that a little bit more and kind of early memories of going into this. I remember you spoke about the Save the Whales campaign.
Yes, I remember growing up in and the Save the Whale campaign. The whales were a figure of my childhood, I imagine. I also grew up on the south coast of England, and I remember right on the cliffland, the really wild cliffland there, and I remember one day the whole rocky cliff was covered in bright little bits of plastic, and they were disposable lighters, and they had been washed off a ship, and a container had washed off, and the whole thing was covered in colorful bits of plastic. And to get masses of volunteers down to reach these inaccessible places and pick up and bring back these bags and bags and bags of this, totally unnecessary stuff that we have. These are the kind of memories I have growing up. I also remember very strongly swimming in the ocean, in the cold water, and off the rocks, and those kind of things are very familiar in Santa Cruz. I see that a lot. So the actual being immersed in water and being around it a lot is really important in gaining, again, what you said, Ari, this idea of empathy. And I think that, Laurie, you mentioned that too, to not only comprehend, which is one part of it, but also to feel a connection to something is part of how you start to gain access to it and gain the motivation to understand more. So that is part of what I'm doing here. And you mentioned the question of the idea of sitting on the whale's back or being carried by this animal, which is obviously impossible. And yet it's somehow not impossible. Isn't this totally strange? This kind of reminds me of the situation we're in now. Isn't this a totally strange situation? But it's real.
Right.
So, there's a room behind us here full of whales, and yet there are no whales in this room. But we have the sensation that we're going into a room close to these animals. And when you think about this small tag that doesn't harm or hurt the whales and the difficulty of getting this video at all, and then bringing it back and looking through it, and I think that we don't actually question really that we're looking through a camera at a very tiny image, with the certain light levels that we can see that come through the camera, what the camera's capabilities are, compressed in whatever ways they are. So we're looking through technology, and yet we are able, because we're so used to looking through that, to gain this kind of emotive and empathetic understanding of what this might be. So we make those leaps. Partly because we're now so trained in the moving image. And the danger, I think, is that we don't actually think beyond that and think, well, what we're seeing and what we're hearing is just a tiny, we are not seeing what the whale sees. Right. This is not actually the experience of the whale. So we mustn't kind of mistake those two. They're very different. But it gives like this little tiny window, and the window seems so massive to us. It opens up this whole world, and you've spoken about that scientifically. And I think also, visually, culturally, all these other things that we can really access that in a different way through. So I mean, I'm always interested in our relationship to technology and how it can both help us and also limit us, and we need to question what we're seeing and what we're looking at. That's why you hear a lot of the times the ice banging against the microphone, or you see when the whale surfaces, you see the reflections of the orange tag as it's that there needs to be some awareness of what we're looking at, as well as being able to be immersed in it. So
sure.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot at the Coastal Watershed Council about that concept recently with education becoming distance learning in response to COVID. And now a lot of learning is being done behind a screen, and we're not able to do as many field trips and spend as much time outside with kids. We really lost it very suddenly this spring, but even as we look to the fall, what is that experience going to be like for kids right now? And you mentioned, your youth and how that inspired you, and you as well. I think we all have that story of how experiences in our youth helped us connect to the world around us. And so we've been talking a lot in the environmental education sphere as to how do we bridge that gap when learning is all of a sudden behind a screen. How can we still make it experiential, and how can we bring kids outside and just do things in a different way? And we don't have the answers yet, but it's definitely a problem that what we were heading toward anyways, but then all of a sudden is really being dropped in our laps to grapple with in the very immediate short term.
Yeah, so I really recognized this situation, and one of the things was, we're opening a gallery, we're opening this exhibition, and nobody can come. So we had at least 3 weeks of nobody being able to be here. So we had to put it online and try to make it, and in some ways you think, well, how many people can actually come here anyway, So that in itself is an important part of realizing how many people you can reach. But the physical being in this space is really important, as it is. Ari can go to the Antarctic and be as close as he can to the whales. He still can't dive down with them, So there are these limits of what we can physically experience, and there's some kind of hybrid. But what I wanted to add was, what we're dealing with is environments that we cannot access, and so we need to be able to experience these spaces in some way that relates to us physically, our human sensorium, something that we can hear and see. So we have to bring them into our sensory ranges somehow, and we have to. They may be very distant, and in which case we have to bring them close to us. So this idea of distance learning, and it kind of had, as difficult as it is, it's bringing up the very fact of how we can connect to these distant places and bring them and sort of overlay them in our direct environment in these different ways. So it's kind of, those are my thoughts for now.
Yeah. It's you kind of touched on it. I was just going to bring up, we're in uncertain times right now. 2020 there's so much going on between the pandemic and everything that's happening in the world. There's so much unrest, and I think that there's so many movements happening right now, but I believe that climate change is one that has to be at the forefront of our conversation. And right now we're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think with both of these movements, it's happening globally. It's this worldwide piece that I think with Ari and Yolande, both of your work, it truly is global. It's worldwide, right? And I turn to Laurie because it's acting locally. How can we create change, and really how can we make a difference? I think with both of these movements, with Black Lives Matter and also creating climate change, this social and environmental change, that the youth are making this huge leap, and they are just they're the ones pushing the ice, I feel like, in massive ways that hasn't happened in history before. So I think it's incredibly profound. Greta Thunberg, she started the strike. Was it the strike for for environmental change last year, the school strike, which is amazing that there were millions that were standing up for this. How can we do better in the world? And the time is now, absolutely. You started a nonprofit, I think, for this very reason, how you could bring your global experience right into the Monterey Bay. And can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, so a few years ago, myself, my wife, a couple of our close colleagues started the California Ocean Alliance. And the idea behind it was to provide another platform and way to teach kids about being a scientist and STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, and arts, STEAM, now with arts included in that. And there, in this community here, there seemed to be a gap where high school kids didn't have something that was focused for them. There's great summer camps for kids that are elementary school, and then when you get to university, there's a lot. But the way that you get kids interested in STEAM in university is to get them excited about it in high school. And so we developed a program, an educational program that took advantage of the expertise that we had in ocean acoustics, in animal behavior, and working with our colleagues at the Marine Lab here and providing these hands-on experiences for kids in the summer where we teach them how to do science. We go out and we put a tag on a whale and they radio track it and they take photographs of it. We go into the Elkhorn Slough and they measure where harbor seals are and where sea otters are.
Oh, great.
And we go to Año Nuevo and they read tags on elephant seals and learn how to do behavior. And marine mammals are a great hook, obviously. But the idea behind it is it's almost like, I don't want to say it's almost like tricking your kids to eat vegetables, but it's getting them excited about the math and doing science by showing them how to do it on a really interesting kind of critter. And that's been really exciting and powerful for us to see how quickly you can change a person. You can see a light bulb go on in these kids, and they open up either because they haven't had an opportunity to have that experience before, or it's inside them, and this is just the outlet for them. And that's been with a small number of kids, just logistically. This week we're doing that course. Unfortunately, we had to sort of pivot, and we're now doing that online this week. And we've got 100 kids from around the world. We've got, I think, 7 or 8 countries amazing. That are doing this. And today we had one of our colleagues at Año Nuevo who basically had his phone, and he went around and showed them the seals and showed them how we do research. Cool. And then they were taken through a virtual tour of the research facilities at the Marine Lab today and shown how you train seals and how you do these kinds of things. And so we're trying to make the most of the situation to, instead of now training 12 kids on hands-on, let's teach 100 kids slightly remotely, with the idea that hopefully next year we'll have more kids that are inspired to go do this and do these kinds of experiences closer to their home. And so for us, that was just a really important thing, to not keep our science in the settings where we are from day to day, and not just keep it in the journals, because like we talked about, we're in a community here that values the things around us. Sure. And kids will get their parents excited. And that was the main motivation, I think, behind that. Yeah, one of the other things that you mentioned was sort of this, in this time that we're in right now, how unique it is. And one of the things that we're doing now locally and trying to do globally is understand how, as human use of this environment changes, how it impacts the animals. And, I've seen lots of photographs of cities where you've got a lot of wildlife roaming around in ways that it hadn't before. And whales respond to ocean sound and human sound by becoming more stressed. And there's a lot of good data to show that the more noise that's in an ocean, the higher the stress levels in these animals. The higher the stress levels, the more background noise, the harder it is for them to communicate, to echolocate and find food. And it's going to eventually affect their populations. And so right now, or at least a couple months ago, there was no boating activity in Monterey Bay, and these whales were still here. There was no boating in Stellwagen Bank off Cape Cod. There's not going to be any tourist vessels in the Antarctic this coming year. And we have these hydrophones that are listening to the ocean constantly. And so what we're doing is we're taking those recordings and we're going out and collecting samples from the whales, and we're going to measure the stress hormone levels in those whales and show, in April, this is what the levels were, and this is what the sound levels were. And then next year, when things are back to more normal, we're going to go out and say, and this is what the sound is now, and this is what the stress levels are, and try and show people that there are these direct connections between the activities that we do and the ways that we can pollute, even if it's not a tangible plastic. It's a sound that is kind of ephemeral, but it's constant. That impacts animals in our ecosystem. And it gives us a chance to think about how we can then change what we're doing to minimize that. It doesn't mean we can't go whale watching and you can't go fishing in the bay, but there are ways that you can do it in a way that is not going to impact things nearly as much. Sure. And it's the exact same way that you guys talk to people about how you clean up a river. Like, it's not changing your lifestyle completely, but doing these small things that can, if everybody is doing them, can make a big difference. And a river is a great way to do that, because you can measure water quality and tangibly show people, we're in the green now. And those kinds of things I think are really powerful.
Definitely. I know Coastal Watershed Council works a lot on kind of trying to change policy, right? And I think that when we think about our environment and how we use art to have the human and the emotion piece, right? With the emotional connection, Yolande, you say in your work, it heightens our awareness of our surroundings and the environment we're in. I absolutely feel that when I experience your work. And if we want to create change, we have to change policy, right? And your agency does a lot with this. And how can others do the same? Or should we all just turn to you and say, do all the hard work for us?
No, I'd like others to join us, please.
I just thought you may say that.
Well, Yeah, there's a number of different ways that folks can get involved. One of the examples actually that immediately came to mind is not Coastal Watershed Council's work, but just really want to celebrate the water quality improvements at Cowells Beach. That was a tremendous effort by the city, county, nonprofits, and others, and such an exciting win that we just had a couple weeks ago, where for years and years and years, that beach was on the beach bummer list from Heal the Bay as being one of the dirtiest in the state. And they just had such a victory where the list came out and we're no longer on it. And it's a water quality win. And those changes take time. And so stories like that inspire me that we'll have some of those improvements for the San Lorenzo River soon. And some of the policy changes are not glamorous and sexy. And in fact, one of our more recent ones was looking at sewer laterals in the city of Santa Cruz, which are the pipes that connect your apartment building or your home to the sewer main. It's a little pipe that goes between your property and the big city pipe. And a lot of Santa Cruz residences are fairly old, over 100 years old, or have clay pipes, and those crack over time. And you kind of only notice it when there's a major failure and you start to smell it in the neighborhood, and it's a big deal. And you don't want that, trust me. And so some folks don't even know that the apartment building owner, the homeowner, is responsible for maintaining that and should have it inspected. And so we could go around and we could try to get every single person to do this inspection. And we did provide, the city of Santa Cruz provided some rebates in order to do that. But one of the most effective things in that case, or in many cases sometimes, is to simply shift a policy to really try to encourage that more. So now when a home is sold in the city of Santa Cruz, there is a required inspection of that. And in our work at the Coastal Watershed Council, we worked with the Santa Cruz County Realtors Association, who you can imagine do not want another regulation on the sale of a home. But even they were excited about this because they've had some horror stories of selling a home and 2 weeks later a major failure happens. So when you can find those policy shifts that are really win-win-win all across the board, I think of the theme of interconnection of this work within the activist space of intersectionality and all these different ways that we can find shared common ground in our work. So whether you're working on a policy shift or shifting public opinion or whatever it may be, when you can find that shared common ground, I think it just helps to pave the path and make it that much easier to do that work. And really, when we do connect to our values and these things that we love, finding that common ground can be easy. Not always is, but if you slow down and take the time to do that, it's also really, really meaningful. I think that's where I found a lot of value in my work when I hear folks talk about what they love. So
yeah. All three of you are academics in a way. I know you've done a lot of research. You're in schools now, but that's another component to all of this, the teaching component. And it's, when you take it into, with both of you teaching up at UCSC, I'm sure this is a major part of your conversation in the art department and also in scientific research, that you're having these conversations with your students. Are you with environmental justice a bit in your work?
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a central part of what it is to be a young artist today. It's and we happen to be in this incredible location that it really asks us to engage with that. So yeah.
I wonder a bit too what comes up with art, and I always think about waste. Especially during this time, I was talking with Andrew, who's doing our tech. Thank you, Andrew, with Indexical. But we're cleaning everything, and it's the environmental waste right now. It has to be done, and we know this. But I think a lot with installation art, there's a lot of things that get used. You're so incredibly conscious about the materials that you use, so there is very little waste, if any at all. You'll reuse parts from other installations and things of this nature. And how is that addressed with students? How you have this dream installation that you want to make, or this dream sculpture, that requires all of these materials, and what happens with it? The materials that you do with it. Is that part of the conversation?
Yes, that's absolutely part of the conversation. I mean, one of the courses I taught last year was Introduction to Sculpture to nearly 200 students, 200 plus, and what do you do when they're all making sculptures, one a week for 10 weeks? That's a lot of material. So, it's really important. I can't teach them and have them use all sorts of stuff that goes in the landfill. That's not going to happen. So part of the whole conversation is, what materials are you using? How many, what found materials can you use? What things are biodegradable? What sort of, that's part of what you're doing and what you're working with. And, a lot of people use found plastics. It's not like it's just a consciousness of not just going out, buying what you can, and then disposing of it without thinking about that whole loop of what you're making. Because that is part of what the art is anyway.
It starts from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's just, if that is, it's more of a way of thinking about living as well. So it's just bringing that into the process of making, which is, it's not that unusual actually. But yes, it's not necessarily the dream installation that you might imagine. And I know that some people will need to use those kind of materials, but that's not how I think. Although, I do use electricity. I do use these technologies that have these components in them that are tricky, and so I know that is part of the world that I'm in, and the world that I'm presenting in, and the world that I'm working in. But at the same time, I try to minimize it. Yeah.
I think in our sort of sphere, one of the things I try or a couple of things I try and do with the students is to just, first is say, like, make what you're doing count, right? Because we're only doing this because somebody invested in us and gave us the resources to do it. And it's either the National Science Foundation, or it's the World Wildlife Fund, or it's a donor. But wherever it came from, those people believe in what we're doing and believe in you to do this sort of the right way. And if it involves travel, my carbon footprint is enormous. If I have to go to the Antarctic a couple times a year, I'm flying around the planet. And so I have a very active conscious about what I'm doing, and I need to make myself feel okay that I'm doing enough to negate that negative impact that I'm having. And I think teaching that to students early on is pretty important. But it also speaks to why working locally and working in the backyard is such a powerful thing to do, is because we can be out on the water and working. I can ride my bike to the boat that I need to take on the water, and we don't need to use a lot in order to get out here and work to do these things locally. And I don't know if it's a light bulb moment for the kids, but I think it's something that they would overlook or wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. And I think that's an important thing. One other thing I wanted to bring up, when you were mentioning before, both of you guys, about sort of the power of the art and policy change, I feel like one of the great things that art has the capacity to do is to create that emotional response in people that are sort of in positions where they dictate, but also sort of at the community level where the grassroots kind of comes up. And I think a lot about how policy gets changed and how it gets made. And I can see the value of, if you get somebody who's in a position to empathize with what you're doing and to have that emotional response, or to have their child have that emotional response, their capacity and willingness to try and make change is going to be elevated. And that if you get enough people at the basic level that fundamentally believe in what you're doing and want that to be part of the way that they live, that's going to have a huge groundswell. And then there's this feedback, because those people want their constituents happy. And what do they want? They want the same thing that, someone else wants. And so I feel like there's an opportunity to use the power of that connection at the individual level as well as sort of at the community level. And it's really important. And it's something that I think here is definitely not everywhere. This is a pretty unique place and community in that respect. And it's one of the reasons I really like being here.
Can I ask each three of you if you have kind of one wish, or if you could grant us one thing that we can do to make change, make it better? That's really what we want people to do is to care and to say it matters, this matters. What can we tell people? For me at Radius, I say, come experience the art, because I feel like the art speaks for itself, whether it's this show or other exhibitions. Get here, and so can each of you think of one thing that we can kind of leave on to? You want to start?
Absolutely. Yeah, mine is actually very similar, where just visit the river, come down to the San Lorenzo River. Actually, right here at the Tannery is great. You can come to the Radius Gallery, experience the exhibit, and then walk right out behind the building here and go to the river. And in both of these spaces, I think when you can stop and just put your phone down and let things melt away and just be in that space and notice your senses and how it makes you feel, I think is probably the number one thing you can do. And save water.
Yeah, and save water.
Our drinking water comes from the San Lorenzo River, so save water. So I'll say 2. Sorry.
It is. You can have 2, and I will say it is so absolutely special to go along the river walk. It really is. Going to the beach, that's an experience we can all identify with. We get our feet, our toes in sand, and that's one type of experience. But when you walk along the river walk, it's an experience like no other in our town, because you're having this urban experience in a natural environment, So it's pretty amazing that you get to have both. So yes, you can have 2. What about you, Yolande?
So mine would be to learn and practice listening. That would be mine, because I think that listening is it's multi-layered, and there are very different ways that we can practice listening, but listening brings us closer to other people, to other beings, to other environments, and that the more we can listen, the more empathy we can have, but the more I call it a sonic awareness, but also like a sonic intelligence that you can activate the more you listen and the more practice you get at it. It takes a lot of practice, and I think listening can work across many levels right now. And so that's what I would say. Listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would build directly on that, and I would say, I don't know if I can sum it up in a couple of words, but I think the next step to that, and it's so prescient given how people are treating other people today in our world, is to understand other people's point of view and values and respect those, because not everybody is going to come to an art gallery, and not everybody is going to have that same kind of emotion, but recognizing that that's a valid thing and that's an important thing for the person who has it should let you have some more empathy towards them, and recognize that that's important for another group of people, and that even if it may not directly affect you or impact you, that doesn't mean that it's not important and valuable and something that we should respect.
Right. Absolutely. I definitely vote for that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for this conversation. I want to thank our panelists here, Ari Friedlaender with UCSC, and also your nonprofit, which is
California Ocean Alliance.
Thank you so much. And then Yolande Harris, who's the artist who created the installation From a Whale's Back. And then Laurie Egan, who is with the Coastal Watershed Council. So the exhibition was funded through Arts Council Santa Cruz County with the Ebb Flow project, which this was its 6th year. Programs for Ebb Flow will actually continue throughout the year. You can check their website for more information. Also check the Radius Gallery for more information about the dates that we are opened. We do have some gallery visitation here. Come with a face covering, please. Practice social distancing. And thanks everybody again for tuning in. Thank you to Andrew Smith with Indexical for our tech behind the scenes. Good night.
And cut.